Hello friends, today we are going to discuss mens rea. The phrase mens rea means guilty mind. You will not find this as a section in the Indian Penal Code. It does not appear as a section in the IPC. But it is a principle in which the entire content, almost the entire content of criminal law is based. Guilty mind. It arises from an originally Latin phrase, actus reus non facit reum nisi mens sit rea. Quite often when you're reading a book, you'll find that the second word, reus, is absent. But no, the original phrase is this. What does it mean? A guilty act does not make a crime. A guilty act does not make a crime unless there is a guilty mind. Now the basis of this, as I said to you, is not in any statute. It is not in any IPC. It's a common law maxim. What is common law? Law that has evolved over the ages. You would be surprised to know that most of British law today, until today, about 80% of British law is common law. It is only in India that we have a plethora of enacted laws. Virtually every law, every aspect of law is enacted, legislated. But there are certain things which still remain within the domain of common law. And this is a fundamental thing which remains in common law, and that is, you cannot have a guilty act without a guilty mind. Therefore, if somebody commits a crime, and it has to be proved that he is the accused and he should be convicted, it must also be proved that he had a criminal intent. He intended to commit that crime. He has a guilty mind. Right? In India, as you know, friends, we operate on the law that the onus of proof is on the prosecution. Whenever there is a charge, whenever there is a charge sheet, it is the prosecution which has to prove that if I am the accused, did commit the crime, and it also must go to show that I had the intention of committing the crime. For example, I am flying a kite on the roof, right? And some other kite flyer cuts my kite. As they say, kaat di patang. Dheel mein kaati, khech mein kaati, kaat di. Now what happens? The maja, the portion which is wrapped in glass, sharp glass, starts drifting to the ground, and unfortunately, it falls on somebody and it cuts that person. He is injured. Am I guilty? No. Because I was simply flying the kite. I had no intention of killing somebody or hurting somebody. And I had no knowledge that this would happen and somebody would be hurt. So I did not have mens rea. On the other hand, assume I know that I am person A, and I know that person B has just had a recent stomach operation. Right? A very major stomach operation. I know this. I also know that if he is hit in the stomach, he may die. He will probably die. The chances are that he will die. Now, knowing this, I claim that I, in a friendly way, hit him in the stomach. The fact is, if 99% of the people you hit in a friendly way in the stomach, nothing will happen. Maybe some pain, some discomfort, but that is all. But this man, because he had had a major stomach operation, he dies. Injuries open up and he dies. Am I to blame? Yes. Because I had the knowledge. I had the knowledge that if I hit this man in the belly, he will die because of the highly sensitive operation that he has undergone. So if I have the knowledge of what I am doing, and if I have the intent, either of the two, they form the guilty mind. And if there is a guilty mind, then in law, I am the accused and I can be proven guilty. Shall we go ahead? Now the original leading case in the common law area of mens rea is Sheras versus de Rutzen. It dates back to 1895. What had happened? The accused was selling alcohol to a police officer. Now, in those days, there was a rule that every police officer who is on duty should wear an armband or an armlet, they used to call it. So, if he's not wearing that, he is not on duty. And if he's not on duty, you can sell him alcohol. Now, this particular constable, while on duty, had removed his armband. And the accused person then sold him alcohol. What did the court say? It is presumed that when he did not see the armband, he would assume that the constable was not on duty. And if he was not on duty and alcohol was sold to this constable, then there is no mens rea, there is no evil intention. There is no knowledge that what he is doing is wrongful. It is criminal. No. He has seen the constable without his armband. He said, "Arey bhai, this chap is off duty. As per the law, I can sell him alcohol." So he sells him alcohol. The court went on and said another thing. Generally, without mens rea, there cannot be an offense committed. But this presumption can be changed if either the statute, the act, the legislation specifically says that in the case of these offenses, mens rea will not apply. Number one. So there can be an act. For example, there is the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, the NDPS Act, where it can be specific that, look, presumption will be that that person is guilty. Or the subject matter of the law, suppose it is for the great good of the country, it is for the defense of the country, it is for the economic well-being of the country. So if a person has done something wrong under that act, even if he says, I had no intention, the interest of the country comes first and he will be held guilty. So when does mens rea not apply? Either when the statute specifically says that absence of mens rea will not be a defense. Absence of mens rea will not be a defense. Or the crime committed is of such a nature that the law it has violated was meant for the great benefit of the people of this country. Economic, defense, political, social, whatever. So in those two cases only, mens rea is not a working defense, right? Now we come to Indian cases. The most famous case is State of Maharashtra versus Mayor Hans George. Dates back to 1965. Now what was the case? You see, 1962. The notification was issued on November 24 under the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. We don't have it, FERA any longer. We have the FEMA, the Foreign Exchange Management Act. But that time we had the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. It was called FERA. Now an order was issued under Section 8 of FERA that nobody can bring gold into India. And if somebody is not coming to India, but is passing through in transit without coming into India, then, and if he is carrying gold in a ship or in a plane or whatever, that consignment of gold has to be declared in the manifest. What is manifest? The schedule which a plane or a ship carries of what cargo it is having. So if he is carrying gold, even if he is not getting off in India, he has to carry that, he has to mention it in the manifest of the plane or the ship. Either as same bottom cargo, that means it will remain in that plane or that ship. Suppose it is starting from point A and going to point B via India, the declaration will say on the cargo manifest, the declaration will say, this is gold, but it will go in the same ship from A to B via India, but it will stay in the same ship. Or it can be transshipment. It will come here to India, it will be loaded on another plane, which will go to B place. But this declaration has to be there. Now what happened? November 27th evening, a gentleman from Zurich in Switzerland boarded the plane for Philippines, but it was via India. When the plane landed in Delhi airport, he did not come out of the plane. He sat inside the plane, transit passenger. Why should he come out? But the customs men, they had some information. They went inside, they searched him, and they found 34 kilos of gold on his person. He was prosecuted under this FERA Act. Now the majority judgment in this case said, no, he is guilty. He has violated the act, finish. He has violated the order under the act, finish. But Justice Subba Rao, who later became the 9th Chief Justice of India, dissented. He said that as per common law, mens rea is an essential ingredient, an essential part of a criminal offense. Right? So unless the statute, unless the law itself specifically states, if the Section 8 notification or FERA had specifically stated that by mens rea we will not accept, absence of mens rea will not be a defense. It would be a different matter. But unless the statute expressly or by implication, that means it means the same thing. The words can be interpreted to mean the same thing. It excludes mens rea until that mens rea is a defense. So this gentleman, naturally when he started on 27th and the notification came on 24th, and you know government notifications, they are published in some vague gazette somewhere. Nobody reads them. Nobody knows them. So the court said this gentleman who boarded at Zurich and was going to Philippines would not have known of this FERA notification. He had no knowledge and he had no criminal intent. He was carrying the gold on his person as per normal prior law, and he had no necessity to declare it as cargo. Further on, Subba Rao said, even if the statute is to promote welfare or to remove social evil, it is not always that mens rea is excluded. It should be very clear from the words of the statute, either explicitly or by interpretation, that the idea is to exclude mens rea. Right? And the exclusion should be such that whoever violates is under strict liability. He is under strict liability. I will explain strict liability a little later. What it really means is that person will have to clearly show that he is not to blame. The prosecution can happen. So the judge, Subba Rao, a great judge, let me tell you. He was Chief Justice, later a fantastic Chief Justice. He mentioned that nobody can seriously state that, Bhaiya, this chap knew all along that there is a FERA notification. How on earth somebody who is leaving Zurich on 27th night know that on 24th, India, the RBI has issued a notification which may be appeared in some gazette. It would certainly not have reached New Zealand, Zurich. So, as per Justice Subba Rao, the accused was not guilty of the offense charged, right? Later, there's a major leading case, Inder Sen versus State of Punjab. Now, what happened in this case? Mr. A was to receive a railway parcel, supposedly containing apples. What he does, he endorses the receipt, you know. Railway ki receipt banti hai, it is known as RR. Railway receipt, you can endorse it to somebody. He endorses it to Mr. B. And he says, Bhaiya, please go and collect it from the railway parcel office. I am busy, I am going somewhere else. Now this B goes, but the police sees the parcel, and when they open it, they found that apples are there, but there is also a large quantity of opium. Now this was banned under Section 9 of the Opium Act. It was an offense, right? It still is an offense, incidentally, right? So the accused, however, said, look, I have nothing to do with this parcel. The other gentleman, Mr. A, he said to me, Bhaiya, you are going there, take delivery. He endorsed the railway receipt to me, so I came here. But Section 9 of the Opium Act says that it is to be presumed that if a person is not able to satisfactorily explain why the opium came in his possession, he will be deemed to have committed an offense. So where does the onus of proof now shift? On the accused. Otherwise, in mens rea, onus of proof is on the prosecution. But the Opium Act, Section 9, clearly said that the person who is accused, he has to account for and satisfactorily account for how he came by that opium, So the onus of proving that he is innocent and he had no guilty mind no longer rests on the prosecution. It is now entirely the job of the accused. Prosecution does not have to prove his guilty mind. That is presumed. Okay? Right. So, the court quoted another foreign judgment, British judgment in fact, that it is true. If there is a lady, she is carrying a handbag somewhere, right? And that handbag is open. Most ladies, you know, the handbags they carry like this. Sometimes it is open, sometimes it is partly open. Sometimes there is so much already they cannot shut the handbag, right? Impossible to close a lady's handbag at times. So the Lord Parker said in this 67 judgment that if something is slipped into that handbag or into the basket she is carrying, the lady will certainly not know it has been slipped there. But that is correct. But in this particular case, because as I said, the statute clearly said that person in possession of opium will be presumed guilty under the Act. Therefore, the court, Supreme Court held that in this case, it is for the accused to prove that when he came into possession of that opium, he had no knowledge of it, and unless he proves it to the satisfaction of the court, sorry, the defense of mens rea will not automatically help him, right? Now, where is mens rea excluded? I'll give you some examples. One is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, Section 3 of the Money Laundering Act says, among other things, it says a lot of things, but it also says if you are in possession of the proceeds of crime, you are presumed guilty of money laundering. Proceeds of crime, now I will tell you. A certain Mr. A commits a theft of 20 lakhs of rupees, right? He buys a car, a luxury car with that money. Then he sells the car to B. B does not know it was purchased with the money which had been stolen. He buys that car in good faith and pays the price to A. B also then sells the car to C, who has absolutely no idea that the car initially was purchased with stolen money, so he buys it. But as per the Money Laundering Act, if Mr. C is found in possession of the car, which is the proceeds of the original crime of theft, then he will be presumed to have committed the offense of money laundering. He has to satisfy the court that I had not only no mens rea, I had no knowledge. Right? So mens rea as an automatic defense is excluded. The prosecution does not have to prove it. It is the accused poor chap who has to prove it. The same thing applies in Section 54 of the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances NDPS Act. Also, there is no mens rea as a defense in 3 cases: strict liability, vicarious liability, and constructive liability. Now, suppose I have a factory which is manufacturing chemical materials. It also has gases like ammonia, chlorine, etc., part of the chemical manufacturing process. Now, I have a strict liability to ensure that the gas does not escape and injure people. Now, if the gas escapes from my factory for no fault of mine, some mechanic has left some bolt loose, some rat has gnawed away at some pipe or something, etc., or somebody has sabotaged it also. It does not matter. I am under strict liability to ensure that if I am having a premises where from dangerous things can escape, it is whether it is a zoo or a factory from which tigers can escape. Whatever. If I have a premises where there are things which can be dangerous to other humans, I am under strict liability to keep them there. I cannot say, sir, I did not know, I did not let them go, I did not open the gate of the zoo. Sorry. If you are the owner or the manager of the zoo or the factory, then you are under strict liability. Now, what is vicarious liability? Suppose I am a dealer in some goods. Now, I sell those goods to, I am A, I sell them to B. But while selling them, I give the goods to X. X is my agent, my munshi, my agent, my salesman, whatever. Now, while going there, while going for delivery to B, the agent slits open one of the box and takes away some of the stuff inside. So what happens? B does not get the full delivery. Now my salesman X may be separately guilty of theft. Okay, that's a different point. But I am under vicarious liability to B. Why? Because X was my agent. And I am vicariously liable. I stand in. Instead of him, I am the one who is liable for his deeds as far as third parties are concerned. Vicarious liability. So I will have to go and tell B, Bhaiya, this was stolen, here is the money, or here are the replacement goods. It may cost me a lot of money. I may lose lakhs of rupees, doesn't matter. But that is my vicarious liability. The third is constructive liability. Now, if you have attended my lecture on common intention, or if you attend that lecture, you will discover that there is section 34 of the IPC as common intention. So when a crime is committed where 3 or 4 people gather, and a crime is committed on some fifth person, then irrespective of whether or not a person actually committed that crime, if he shared that intention, he or she is constructively liable. Now, for example, take a case. 4 people go and pick up a fight with Mr. X. And they go armed with lathis, knife, whatever. Now, when Mr. X, there is a fight, all 4 become very heated, and there is a common intention then, Maro Salim, let us kill him. They don't say it, they don't announce it. The intention is formed on the spur of the moment. Now what happens? A, B, C and D have gone to X. A, B and C have got some weapons, lathis, batons, sticks, hockey sticks, whatever. Mr. D does not carry anything. So A, B and C hit him. Mr. D only keeps saying, Yaar, maro sale ko. Maro sale ko. Now D has a constructive liability. Although his blows did not kill X. He did not administer any fatal blow to X. He did not participate in the delivering of blows to the person of X. But he suffers from a constructive liability of common intention. So here also mens rea will not apply because it is assumed that he shared the same intention as the others, number one, and he is liable for the same punishment for the offense which the others will get. So strict liability, vicarious liability and constructive liability. These are cases where mens rea is not of much use in a defense. There are so many statutes. I've given only 2 examples. In India, we have a large number of statutes, very frankly, where the presumption is that you are guilty. You have a guilty mind. And if I am the accused, the presumption is I have a guilty mind, mens rea is not a defense. I have to prove conclusively that no, I did not have the guilty mind. I had no knowledge. This did not happen due to me. So I think that finishes our lecture today. Thank you ever so much, and look forward to meeting you guys again. Thank you.